year, we did what was actually a really exciting and informative task. So last year we did presentations, then we had an hour to an hour and a half in the room afterwards where we started to look at what is physically active learning. And then we wanted to look at the future directions, so looking at policy, research and practice. Because we had quite a unique audience that we brought together. So we had teachers, we had policymakers, we had researchers, we had some students, we had local authority, public health, etc. So we wanted to capture all of those views. And today is the first time that these have been presented, so it is a little bit raw. But you'll see some of the outcomes of that and how we hopefully can use, we're going to put it into an academic paper. It's currently being written by the team that was involved, all presenters from last year. And I'm looking to get these two guys on board. And we did it in two tasks. So the first task was we asked people to get loads of post-it notes and tell us what is physically active learning. So how would you define it? And I think we've actually seen many of the answers today in terms of how diverse physically active learning can be. It doesn't need to be that traditional in the sort of classroom-based learning. It can move well beyond that. The second task, which was really cool, was washing lines. So what we asked the groups to do was to come up with what do we need to do in terms of policy, research and practice to advance physically active learning. And they used 3 different colours, and the first task was to hang them on the bottom washing line. We then asked the groups to rank them in terms of priority. So the bottom washing line was low, the middle one was medium, and the top one was high priority. So you can see the group here, which was led by Dr. Peter Collins, and actually has some of the members in the audience. We've got Alison from Teesside, who's back again, Henry from Southampton, Bryn, Richard. In fact, it was a pretty good group. And then so we got our top priorities. And then with the top priorities, we then said, right, fine, rank them and tell us what we need to work on. So we got a really, really interesting list of outcomes from multiple stakeholder groups. And this is some of the outcomes of those 2 exercises. So the first one was we were trying to put physically active learning within a context. So we've loosely used a social ecological framework to try and help people to understand what we need to do to influence positive PAL implementation. The main box is the teacher competence and confidence, and some of the things that they may need. But in terms of the teacher's decision making and how we might need to influence this moving forward, it's thinking about the curriculum area. Within that curriculum area, what's the learning outcome that the teacher is trying to achieve? And then the next stage is 2 things. It's the approach they want to take with the pupils to help them meet that learning outcome in partnership with the physical environment that the teacher can use. So one of my sort of criticisms of PAL at the moment is, definitely not these 2 guys, but it's predominantly in the classroom. And actually, PAL can go well beyond the classroom, and we've got a job to do as researchers, but also initial teacher training, to actually develop their skills and expertise to be able to teach beyond the classroom. And then that feeds into the physical activity characteristics. So the combination of everything above will influence what we're ultimately trying to work on as physical activity professionals. And then what we need to help the teachers do is reflect on, and we should also have, in a later model of this, we've got learning outcome, which I added in a couple of weeks ago. We need to help the teachers to reflect and understand, so I think it links to what GK was saying earlier. It's reflective practice, so how are the pupils reflecting and learning, but also how are the teachers reflecting and learning, and can use this diagram to think, I use this approach that didn't really ultimately end up in the learning that I wanted, or the depth of learning that I required, or the physical active intensity that we were after. Actually, what can I now do to change that, going back up the model? But then, of course, this sits in a multi-layered framework. So we've got to then think, that's fine and at the teacher level, but we've got to move out to the school culture and policy, and what do we need to do to influence head teachers, etc., governors, parents. So when we've worked with schools, parents can be highly critical. If you take a pupil or pupils from sat down at a desk to learn, that's what I used to do 30 years ago, why on earth are you changing it? Can be highly critical. Social media can play a role. But then we go beyond that and up to national policy. And what's really exciting is you heard Bryn and Ian have been at the National Association of Head Teachers, and actually that's not necessarily policy, but we're starting to get into some of those upper level groups and having a positive effect on PAL implementation. And hopefully with this paper we can start to use that to leverage people like Ofsted, DFE, etc. So we then, and this is important to say, these were designed with lots of feedback from the paper team, so lots of feedback from people like Ian and Richard, giving that kind of practitioner perspective. So this is just to say, actually there's 6 environments within a school. We came up with 6 environments that you can use for physically active learning. So you've got your classroom, you've got a modified classroom, which Richard and Ian showed in their presentations. You can use the school corridor. There were some of the comments coming back from a school that worked with children with special educational needs, which used their school in a completely different way. We've got the school hall or gymnasium, the playground and green space. And I think one of the really telling quotes was a teacher from a school who described their school as a school in a garden, and that actually the classroom was the whole entire school, and that they spent a lot of their time teaching outside and using the green space for education. And for me that's really special, because it's coming back to this physical activity as a byproduct. Let's get past the kind of physical active learning that is trying to wedge physical activity into the learning experience rather than letting it happen naturally. So in terms of some of the summaries that came out, it's where does research need to go, what do we need to work on? It's dissemination of research findings, and this was one of the big things that came out from the ISPA conference. So how do we get the research into practice? So days like this is a great example, but also going into practitioner journals, getting into teacher conferences. We need to do more process evaluation, look at establishing feasibility, sustainability, and generally just finding out what works, and more importantly, what doesn't work. You know, what doesn't work, what do we need to stop doing? And then moving to the whole system approach. So that's, I think, moving beyond physically active learning. So like Nicola mentioned earlier, we're looking at establishing a whole school approach to physical activity with the hope of developing a regional model that can be used at a national level. And we've got some May, June time, some really exciting speakers coming together for that conference. Policy, this was you, Vic, wasn't it? So I get to have this slide. So Vic led the policy strand, and he's just going to summarise it quickly. Yeah, you can talk.
You can hear me. The main thing, and Richard, where are you? You're over there, you did it with me. Our main one was self-governance. One of the things was the missed opportunity, and within policy now for physical active learning, there should really be more of an emphasis on self-governance, and senior management teams can implement without Ofsted a lot of what's going on with the funding that's available. The second one, which was really heavy, was the accountability and governance and competence of Ofsted, and the key driver that's restricting them from doing physical active learning was this Ofsted movement, but also the competence of the Ofsted inspectors as well, and the lack of training when they're assessing the physical activity and wellbeing aspect that we're going into. So there's a real push now that needs to be more put within that. And finally, the last one was initial teacher training at policy level. Needs to be more emphasis, preschool training for teachers to actually have physical active learning. So without putting them into the schools, we now need to actually invest a lot more time in that ITT programme for physical active learning, alternative ways of engaging children to learn. And they were the 3. Is that right, Rich?
Spot on, and nothing else I can add.
It was like, yeah. It was a few months ago, so it's hard to like go, put me on the spot. Can you just tell us? I was like, can you not just want to grab? They were the 3. There was a lot though. There was out of all of the themes, that theme seemed to be a big one. There was a lot that came out of analysis.
And this was the last one in terms of supporting practice. So the 3 key themes that came from that was to develop a community of practice. So multi-stakeholder community, but also teacher-to-teacher community. So actually, how can we help teachers to help each other and create maybe some kind of online system where they can interact. We can help people who want to implement PAL share resource, share ideas, reduce the workload. You know, we don't want to make teachers' jobs harder. Teacher confidence and competence, so through ongoing CPD, which sort of links back to the earlier point, and help with availability, so links back to the fish quote ideally, availability and creation of resources. So how can we create these resources to help teachers implement PAL in a more efficient fashion? So just to sum up, where are we and what we're doing, and where do we see, and I'm broadening this beyond Leeds Beckett University, where do we see Yorkshire and Humber? And I would use the phrase, a regional hub of worldwide PAL excellence. So we have an exceptional amount of talent within Yorkshire. All of these companies down the left-hand side are associated with the work that we're doing. So we've got Tactivate, we've got Aspire, who are based in Birmingham, these guys here, we've got Move and Learn, we've got iMoves in the audience, we've got Super Movers, we've also got Questa as well. So you've got an opportunity to draw on the experience of people who are working directly within the field. We're also, for some reason one of the universities hasn't cropped up, I can't pick which one it is, but we also have links to all the universities within the UK who are doing PAL-based research. So whether that's kind of one person out on their own or a team at those universities, we've got links in, and many of them are going to be on this future directions paper. And now what's really exciting, and I feel as though I can put this up after today, is the worldwide part. So we're working now, hopefully, I see this as a start of a fruitful relationship, working with John in the USA and Ger in Norway. We've got Amika Singh, who's in the Netherlands, and also Phil Tomprowski, who's in the USA as well. And for me, the reason that's important is through these relationships, we can start to learn from international experts and take our international expertise to them as well, and share practice and bring that back into our regional hub.